In July 2026, Christopher Nolan released a film that took audiences somewhere they'd never been in a movie theater before. Not a distant galaxy, not a dream within a dream, but a journey that's been told for almost 3,000 years. This is the story of Odysseus, king of Ithaca. This is the story of the Odyssey, one of the oldest surviving works of Western literature. And this is the story of how that ancient poem, a tale first spoken aloud by storytellers long before it was ever written down, became one of the most technically ambitious blockbusters ever put on screen. To understand the movie, you have to understand the poem it's based on. The Odyssey was composed by the ancient Greek poet Homer, likely around the 8th century BCE, making it roughly 2,700 years old. It's technically a sequel, a follow-up to Homer's other epic, the Iliad, which tells the story of the Trojan War itself. The Odyssey picks up after that war ends. Odysseus, the king of Ithaca, has helped the Greeks win, largely thanks to his idea for the Trojan horse, and now all he wants is to go home. It should be a short sail across the Aegean. Instead, angering the sea god Poseidon along the way, it takes him 10 long years, and he loses every single one of his men before he ever sees his island again. Along the way, Homer packs in some of the most famous episodes in all of literature. Odysseus blinds a one-eyed giant called the Cyclops to escape its cave, then makes the mistake of bragging about it. Iced into sees the witness's godness, his witch sound Elias Johnswy. He visits the witch goddess Circe, who turns his men into pigs before becoming an ally. He sails past the sirens, whose song lures sailors to their deaths by having his crew plug their ears. He travels to the edge of the underworld to speak with the dead, and he threads a narrow strait between the monster Scylla and the deadly whirlpool Charybdis, losing men no matter which side he chooses. Every trial strips something away from him, until the man who finally reaches home barely resembles the king who left for war 2 decades earlier. Meanwhile, back on Ithaca, his wife Penelope has spent years fending off a household full of suitors who assume Odysseus is dead and are trying to claim both her hand and his throne. His son Telemachus, just a baby when his father left, is now coming of age without ever really knowing him. The Greeks had a word for this kind of homecoming: nostos, the journey back, and the ache of longing that comes with it. It's actually where we get the modern word nostalgia. At its core, the Odyssey isn't just an adventure story. It's a story about identity, about who we become when we're far from home, and whether the person who finally returns is the same person who left. Here's where it gets interesting for historians. For centuries, most scholars assumed Troy and the Trojan War were pure invention, a beautiful myth with no basis in fact. That changed in the 1870s, when the amateur archaeologist Heinrich Schliemann excavated a mound called Hisarlik in modern-day Turkey, and found the layered ruins of an ancient city, destroyed multiple times, including by fire. Roughly around the era, later excavations found evidence of a violent destruction layer, called Troysa by archaeologists, dated to around 1180 BCE, right in the middle of a broader collapse of Bronze Age civilizations across the eastern Mediterranean. It doesn't prove Odysseus was real, or that a giant wooden horse ever existed, but it suggests it. But it suggests the war, at the heart of these stories, may have started as a real memory, before it became a myth. So how does a real event turn into a poem about cyclopes and sea monsters? For a long time, scholars debated what's called the Homeric question: whether one poet named Homer wrote these epics at all, or whether they were pieced together from generations of oral performers, each adding and reshaping the story as they passed it down by memory alone, long before written Greek even existed in this form. Most modern scholars now lean toward the idea that the Odyssey is the product of an oral tradition refined over centuries by countless unnamed storytellers. It's myth built on top of memory. In December 2034, Universal Pictures announced that Christopher Nolan, fresh off his Best Picture win for Oppenheimer, was adapting the Odyssey for the screen. It wasn't Nolan's first brush with this world. 2 decades earlier, he'd actually been in line to direct the Brad Pitt film Troy, before that project went to another director. Nolan instead took on Batman Begins, a film that changed the course of his career. This time, there was no stepping aside. The Serathi carriers bannered of $100 million, carrying and $6 by came to an expensive production of his career. Massive cast to fill out Homer's world: Matt Damon as Odysseus, Tom Holland as his son Telemachus, Anne Hathaway as Penelope, and Zendaya as the goddess Athena, alongside Robert Pattinson, Lupita Nyong'o, and Charlize Theron in key roles. But what really sets this adaptation apart is how it was actually made. The Odyssey was shot entirely on IMAX 70mm film, the first narrative feature ever to do that for its complete runtime, rather than just a handful of sequences. Production traveled across 6 countries, including Morocco, Greece, Italy, Scotland, Iceland, and Malta, searching for landscapes rugged and ancient enough to stand in for 10 years of Mediterranean wandering. For his take on the mythology itself, Nolan reportedly drew on Emily Wilson's acclaimed 2017 translation of the Odyssey, praised for its modern, plain-spoken language, as well as the handcrafted creature work of legendary stop-motion artist Ray Harryhausen, whose fantastical monsters defined an earlier generation of mythological filmmaking. Film released in theaters on July 17, 2026, and opened to a strong response, both critically and commercially, pulling in over $120 million domestically in its opening weekend alone. Critics have praised it as a surprisingly emotional, character-driven epic, some calling it one of Nolan's most humanistic films to date. Almost 3,000 years separate Homer's original audience from Nolan's, and yet the core of the story hasn't changed at all. A man trying to find his way home, a family waiting and wondering if he ever will. That's probably why the Odyssey has survived as long as it has. Through oral tradition, through translation, through the printing press, and now through 70mm IMAX film. Every generation seems to need to tell this story again, in whatever medium it has. If you enjoyed this deep dive into the myth, the history, and the making of one of 2026's biggest films, hit subscribe. Brain Loop covers a new topic every week. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next loop.